My name is Jonathan Hayes, and for 12 years I served as chief embalmer at Westbrook Funeral Home. The profession requires careful attention to individual identity, proper documentation of each deceased person, and accurate preparation that ensures families receive their loved ones prepared with appropriate dignity and respect. On November 8, 2020, I received an unusual case, twin brothers who had died in separate accidents on the same night. Marcus and David Sullivan, both age 43, had been killed in unrelated incidents approximately 3 hours apart. Marcus died in a motorcycle accident at 9:30 p.m., David in a workplace fall at 12:15 a.m. The coincidence was tragic, but not unprecedented. I'd handled similar situations where family members died within short time frames, requiring careful coordination of preparation procedures and funeral arrangements that honored both individuals appropriately. Both bodies were delivered to our facility with proper death certificates, police reports and medical examiner clearances, standard documentation that confirmed separate accidents, different causes of death, and independent processing through official channels. Marcus Sullivan, motorcycle accident, multiple trauma, pronounced dead at scene. David Sullivan, fall injury, head trauma, pronounced dead at hospital. The brothers were physically similar, but distinguishable. Marcus had a distinctive scar on his left arm from childhood injury. David had a birthmark on his right shoulder, different hair lengths, slightly different facial features, and other characteristics that allowed clear identification. I began preparation procedures with Marcus Sullivan, conducting standard embalming protocols in Preparation Room A. The work proceeded normally: arterial injection, cavity treatment, cosmetic preparation that would provide appropriate appearance for family viewing. But when I stepped out to collect additional supplies, returning after approximately 10 minutes, the body on the preparation table was David Sullivan. Not similar to David, definitively David, showing the birthmark on his right shoulder, different hair length, and facial features that clearly identified him as the brother who had died in the workplace accident. I checked the identification tags, intake documentation, and case files. All paperwork indicated Marcus Sullivan, but the body was undeniably David Sullivan. I assumed I had confused the preparation assignments or mixed up the brothers during intake procedures. Simple administrative error that could be corrected by carefully reviewing documentation and ensuring proper identification. But when I checked Preparation Room B, where David Sullivan should have been stored, I found Marcus Sullivan's body with its distinctive arm scar and motorcycle accident trauma. The brothers had somehow switched positions, though both preparation rooms had remained locked, and I was the only person with access to the facility during night shift. I returned to Preparation Room A, intending to verify David Sullivan's identity and correct any documentation errors. But the body on the table was now Marcus Sullivan, showing the arm scar and trauma patterns consistent with motorcycle accident. The brothers had switched positions. Again, during the few minutes I had spent checking the adjacent room, I called Funeral Director Martinez, reporting the unusual situation and requesting assistance with proper identification and preparation protocols. "Jonathan, you're probably experiencing fatigue-related confusion," Martinez replied. "Working with similar-looking individuals can cause perceptual errors. Take a break and double-check your documentation." But I was certain about what I was observing. The brothers were alternately occupying the same preparation table, switching identities each time I left the room and returned. I decided to remain in Preparation Room A continuously, maintaining constant observation to prevent any further identity confusion. The body remained consistently Marcus Sullivan for approximately 30 minutes while I worked without interruption. But when I turned to reach for embalming fluid, then immediately looked back, David Sullivan was on the table. The switch had occurred in the few seconds when my attention was directed away from the body. Not enough time for physical transportation or substitution, but sufficient for the impossible identity change I was witnessing. I completed David's preparation while maintaining constant visual contact with the body. No further identity changes occurred as long as I didn't look away from the preparation table. But when I finished David's embalming and went to check on Marcus in Preparation Room B, I found it empty. No body, no preparation materials, no indication that anyone had been assigned to that space. According to our intake logs, Both brothers had been delivered and assigned to appropriate preparation rooms. But now only David Sullivan remained, properly embalmed and ready for funeral services. I searched the facility thoroughly: cold storage, preparation areas, temporary holding spaces. Marcus Sullivan's body was nowhere to be found, though I had clear memories of working on both brothers during the evening. The following morning, I reported the situation to administration: one missing body, possible documentation errors, and the need for complete investigation of intake procedures. Jonathan, our records showed delivery of one body last night, Administrator Johnson reported after reviewing all documentation. David Sullivan, workplace accident, received at 1:30 a.m. What about Marcus Sullivan? The motorcycle accident? Johnson checked multiple systems: intake logs, police reports, medical examiner files, funeral arrangements. There's no record of anyone named Marcus Sullivan. No motorcycle accident, no second brother, no twin admission. But I had detailed memories of examining both bodies, reviewing separate death certificates, and beginning preparation procedures for two distinct individuals. I contacted the Sullivan family, intending to clarify arrangements for both brothers' funeral services. Mr. Hayes, we're planning services for David, Mrs. Sullivan replied, our only son who died in the workplace accident. What about Marcus, your other son? Long pause. Mr. Hayes, we don't have a son named Marcus. David was our only child. The family had no memory of a second son, no awareness of twin brothers, no knowledge of anyone named Marcus Sullivan, despite my clear recollection of preparing two bodies with identical surnames. I checked my personal notes from the evening's work. Detailed documentation of both brothers, descriptions of their distinctive identifying marks, separate preparation procedures for Marcus and David Sullivan. But according to all official records, only David Sullivan had ever existed. David's funeral services proceeded normally. The family expressed satisfaction with preparation results and appreciation for dignified services. No one mentioned missing brothers or second burial arrangements, but I kept my personal documentation of the twin brothers case, intake notes describing both individuals, preparation records for Marcus and David, and photographic evidence that I had taken for identification purposes. The photographs showed both brothers clearly: Marcus with his arm scar, David with his shoulder birthmark. Separate images documenting their distinct identities and separate preparation procedures. But when I developed the photographs weeks later, they showed only David Sullivan in both images. Same body photographed from different angles, with both the arm scar and shoulder birthmark visible simultaneously on a single individual. I realized that the twin brothers had somehow merged into one person, combining their separate identities, distinguishing characteristics, and individual histories into David Sullivan's singular existence. But my embalming ledger retained entries for both names, Marcus Sullivan and David Sullivan, both documented as receiving appropriate preparation services on November 8, 2020. Some family relationships, I learned, transcend the boundaries between individual identity and collective existence, allowing twins to share not just genetic similarity but ultimate unity in death that consolidates separate lives into singular memory. My name is Patricia Wong, and for 11 years I worked as senior embalmer at Riverside Memorial Services. The profession requires technical expertise, adherence to health regulations, and sensitive communication with families during their most difficult times. Standard protocols exist for every aspect of body preparation, but occasionally family requests require professional judgment about appropriate modifications to standard procedures. On December 5, 2020, I received the body of Robert Patterson, a 71-year-old man who had died from complications related to pneumonia. His wife, Helen Patterson, accompanied the body to our facility and requested a private consultation about preparation procedures. Mrs. Patterson was composed but visibly distressed, showing the emotional strain typical of spouses who had lost long-term partners. She explained that she and Robert had been married for 47 years, and she was struggling to accept the finality of his death. Ms. Wong, I need to ask a favor that might sound unusual, Mrs. Patterson began. I don't want Robert embalmed immediately. I think he might still be breathing. I explained that Robert had been pronounced dead by hospital physicians, that proper medical evaluation had confirmed death, and that embalming was necessary for preservation and viewing purposes. "I understand what the doctor said," Mrs. Patterson replied, "but I've been watching Robert for 3 hours, and I swear I can see his chest moving slightly. Very faintly, but still breathing." Such requests weren't uncommon. Grieving family members often perceived movement in deceased loved ones, interpreting settling tissues or gas release as signs of continued life. Professional responsibility required sensitivity to family concerns while maintaining appropriate medical standards. I examined Robert Patterson's body carefully. No pulse, no heartbeat, no respiratory activity. Body temperature, muscle relaxation, and tissue condition all confirmed death consistent with hospital certification. But Mrs. Patterson's distress was genuine, and her request for delayed embalming wasn't technically harmful if temporary. "Mrs. Patterson, I can monitor Robert overnight before beginning preparation procedures. This will give you additional time to process the situation while ensuring proper preservation if no signs of life appear." She expressed profound gratitude for the accommodation, explaining that she needed to be certain Robert was truly gone before authorizing irreversible embalming procedures. I positioned Robert's body in our climate-controlled holding area, maintaining appropriate preservation conditions while allowing the extended observation period Mrs. Patterson had requested. Standard practice for situations requiring family acceptance of death confirmation. But throughout the evening, I found myself checking on Robert more frequently than usual. Not because I believed Mrs. Patterson's concerns about continued breathing, but because her certainty had created lingering doubt about the completeness of death verification. At approximately 2:30 a.m., while conducting routine facility checks, I observed something that made me pause. Robert Patterson's chest appeared to rise and fall very slightly. Consistent with shallow respiratory activity, I examined him immediately. No pulse, no heartbeat, no detectable breathing through standard auscultation. But the visual impression of chest movement persisted when I observed from certain angles in specific lighting conditions, positioned myself where the movement was most apparent, and watched carefully for 10 minutes. The chest appeared to rise and fall in slow, barely perceptible rhythm that suggested minimal respiratory function. But when I used stethoscope examination, no breath sounds were audible. When I held a mirror near his mouth and nose, no condensation appeared. Standard tests for respiratory activity remained negative despite the visual impression of breathing. I contacted Dr. Martinez, our consulting physician, describing my observations and requesting guidance about appropriate verification procedures. "Patricia, you're probably observing normal post-mortem changes," Dr. Martinez explained. "Gas production, tissue settling, temperature changes can create visual effects that mimic breathing. But if standard tests are negative, the person is deceased." His explanation was medically sound, but I continued observing apparent chest movement throughout the night. The rhythm was consistent, the movement was subtle but persistent, and Mrs. Patterson's concerns seemed less unreasonable than they had initially appeared. At 6 a.m., Mrs. Patterson arrived to check on Robert and discuss preparation procedures. "Ms. Wong, does he seem different to you? More peaceful than yesterday?" Robert's appearance had indeed changed overnight. More relaxed facial expression, better color, less of the pallor typical in recently deceased individuals. The improvement suggested continued circulation rather than progressive post-mortem changes. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been monitoring Robert throughout the night. His condition appears stable, but all medical tests confirm the hospital's death certification." "But you see the breathing too, don't you?" I couldn't deny what I was observing, though I couldn't explain it medically. "There appears to be some chest movement, but standard verification methods don't detect respiratory function." Mrs. Patterson requested another 24-hour delay, explaining that she wanted to consult with Robert's personal physician about the unusual circumstances. I agreed to continue monitoring while maintaining appropriate preservation conditions, but the following morning, when I arrived to check on Robert Patterson, I found something that challenged every aspect of my professional understanding. An empty gurney where Robert's body should have been. No body, no personal effects, no indication that anyone had been placed in the holding area. The gurney was clean, properly positioned, and showed no signs of recent use. I checked our facility thoroughly: preparation rooms, cold storage, administrative areas. Robert Patterson was nowhere to be found, though I had clear memories of monitoring him throughout the previous night. I contacted Mrs. Patterson immediately, reporting that Robert's body was missing and requesting information about any arrangements she might have made for alternative services. "Ms. Wong, what do you mean Robert is missing?" she replied with obvious confusion. "His body isn't at our facility. Did you arrange transfer to another funeral home?" "Ms. Wong, Robert isn't dead. He came home yesterday evening, perfectly healthy. We're both confused about why you think something happened to him." I explained that Robert had been pronounced dead at the hospital, that his body had been delivered to our facility, and that I had been monitoring him for over 48 hours. "That's impossible," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Robert is sitting right here reading the newspaper. Would you like to speak with him?" Robert Patterson came to the phone, sounding completely normal and healthy. He expressed confusion about my call, explaining that he had been discharged from the hospital after successful pneumonia treatment and was recovering well at home. "Ms. Wong, I'm not sure why you think I died, but I'm feeling much better than I have in weeks. I checked hospital records, death certificates, and admission documentation. No record of Robert Patterson's death, no documentation of body transfer to our facility, no evidence that he had ever been pronounced deceased. According to all official records, Robert Patterson had been successfully treated for pneumonia and discharged home in good health, but I had detailed personal notes documenting his death, body delivery, and the extended monitoring period Mrs. Patterson had requested, evidence of professional services that apparently had never been required. Sometimes, I wonder whether Mrs. Patterson's certainty about continued breathing had somehow prevented her husband's complete transition to death, allowing him to return to life during the monitoring period she had requested. Some death confirmations, I learned, remain provisional until grieving families accept their finality, and some professional accommodations provide opportunities for impossible recoveries that transcend medical understanding. My name is David Martinez, and for 14 years I worked night shift at Westside Memorial Services. Night embalmer duties required maintaining solitary operations during overnight hours, preparing bodies for morning services, completing chemical preservation procedures, and ensuring proper facility security while working alone in the preparation areas. The embalming room was located in the basement level of our facility, providing appropriate privacy for technical procedures and maintaining climate conditions necessary for body preservation. The basement contained preparation areas, chemical storage, and the communications equipment necessary for coordinating with administrative offices during emergency situations. Our telephone system was standard institutional equipment, direct lines to administrative areas, emergency services, and supplier networks. The basement embalming room had a single telephone for professional communications, though night shift rarely required extensive phone usage given the solitary nature of the work. For 13 years, the telephone functioned normally. Occasional administrative calls, supplier consultations, and emergency communications that supported smooth facility operations. But in January 2021, the phone began exhibiting behavior that disrupted my work routine and created persistent disturbances during overnight procedures. Every morning at exactly 3:11 a.m., the telephone would ring. Not the gradual ring buildup typical of incoming calls, but immediate full-volume ringing that suggested urgent communication requiring immediate attention. The caller ID consistently displayed the same information: basement with no number, no additional identification, no indication of call origin beyond the general location descriptor. But we were already in the basement. The embalming room occupied the facility's lowest level, with no sub-basement areas, utility tunnels, or lower-level spaces that could originate calls identified as coming from basement locations. When I answered the calls, I encountered consistent silence, no voice, no background noise, no indication that anyone was attempting to communicate, just open line with no audible content. Initially, I assumed the calls were misdirected communications from building automation systems, security equipment, or other facility infrastructure that might generate automatic dial sequences during maintenance cycles. I contacted our communications contractor, reporting the regular 3:11 a.m. calls and requesting investigation of possible system malfunctions or equipment problems. "Mr. Martinez, your phone system shows no automated calling features," Technician Johnson reported after examining our equipment. "No programmed dial sequences, No maintenance protocols that would generate calls at scheduled times. But the calls continued nightly. Precisely 3:11 a.m., caller ID showing basement, followed by silence when I answered. I began documenting the phenomenon, call duration, any audible content, attempts to trace call origin through telephone company services. But the calls showed no traceable source, no billing information, no routing data that would indicate their technical origin. On February 15th, I decided not to answer the 3:11 a.m. call, hoping to understand whether the caller would leave voicemail messages or attempt alternative communication methods. The phone rang continuously for 17 minutes. Uninterrupted ringing that persisted far beyond normal caller patience. When the ringing finally stopped, I checked for voicemail messages. None recorded. But the following night, the 3:11 a.m. call resumed its normal pattern, single ring cycle. Caller ID showing basement, silence when answered. I attempted engaging the silent caller in conversation. Hello? Is someone there? Do you need assistance? No response to questions, no acknowledgement of my attempts to communicate. But the line remained open as if someone were listening. In March, I began detecting something during the silent calls that troubled me. Faint breathing sounds, barely audible, but rhythmic, suggesting someone was indeed present on the other end of the line. The breathing was slow, steady, consistent with someone in resting state rather than active communication. Not the rapid breathing that might indicate emergency or distress, but calm, patient respiration that continued throughout extended call durations. Can you hear me? I asked during one of the breathing episodes. Are you trying to communicate something? The breathing continued unchanged, same rhythm, same volume. No response to my questions or attempts at interaction. I contacted the telephone company, requesting technical analysis of the mysterious calls and assistance with identifying their source. Mr. Martinez, these calls aren't showing up in our system logs, the customer service representative reported. No record of incoming calls to your number at 3:11 a.m., no billing information, no routing data. But the calls were clearly occurring. Audible ringing, active line connection, ongoing communication sessions that lasted until I ended them by hanging up. On April 3rd, I experienced something that challenged my understanding of telephone technology. The 3:11 a.m. call continued even after I unplugged the phone from the wall jack. The disconnected telephone continued ringing, despite having no electrical connection to the building's communication system. When I lifted the receiver, I heard the familiar silence followed by steady breathing. This is impossible, I said into the disconnected phone. You can't be calling a phone that's unplugged. The breathing paused briefly, then resumed with what seemed like slightly increased intensity, as if the caller were acknowledging my observation about the technological impossibility of our communication. I tested this phenomenon repeatedly, unplugging the phone, removing batteries from cordless units, even disconnecting the main communication line to the embalming room. But the 3:11 a.m. calls continued, always displaying basement on caller ID, always featuring silent breathing that persisted regardless of the phone's connection status. By May, I had begun anticipating the calls, preparing for the nightly 3:11 a.m. communication sessions that had become routine elements of my work schedule. The breathing had become almost companionable, patient, consistent, suggesting someone who simply wanted acknowledgement of their presence. Good morning, I began saying when I answered the calls. Are you checking on the night shift? The breathing would continue, sometimes with subtle variations that suggested responsiveness to my communication attempts. Not conversation, but awareness that someone was listening and perhaps appreciating the acknowledgement. On May 20th, I received a call that differed from the normal pattern. Instead of silence and breathing, I heard a voice whispered, barely audible, but clearly attempting verbal communication. Thank you for answering. The voice was soft, professional, suggesting someone accustomed to quiet environments and respectful communication. Who is this? I asked, night shift supervisor. Checking on operations. What operations? I'm the only person working down here. All of us. Everyone who works the night shift in basements. Making sure you're not alone. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but established that the mysterious caller was apparently another night shift worker, possibly from our facility's past, maintaining supervisory contact with current overnight operations. Are you still alive? I asked, still working, still supervising. still making sure night shift personnel have appropriate support. The calls continued throughout my remaining time at Westside Memorial Services, providing a sense of connection and supervision that made the solitary night shift work feel less isolated, but they also served as reminders that some professional responsibilities transcend normal employment boundaries, continuing indefinitely for supervisors who take their duty to support night shift workers seriously enough to maintain contact long after their official obligations have ended. Some telephone systems, I learned, operate according to principles that transcend standard communication technology, allowing dedicated supervisors to maintain contact with night shift employees who need to know they're not completely alone during the isolated hours when most of the world sleeps. My name is Elizabeth Rivera, and for 10 years I coordinated evening services at St. Agnes Memorial Chapel. Evening viewings required careful attention to lighting, atmosphere, and environmental conditions that provided comfort for grieving families while maintaining appropriate dignity for memorial services. Our chapel featured standard electrical lighting, overhead fixtures, accent lamps, and adjustable systems that created appropriate ambiance for services of various cultural and religious traditions. But occasionally, weather conditions or power outages required backup lighting that maintained safe navigation and appropriate visibility for family gatherings. On March 18, 2021, a severe winter storm caused widespread power failures throughout our area. The chapel lost electrical service at approximately 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes before a scheduled viewing for Margaret Santos, a 67-year-old woman who had died in a house fire 3 days earlier. The Santos family had requested evening viewing with traditional Catholic elements, expecting approximately 50 attendees for memorial services that would provide community support. During their time of grief, emergency protocols required backup lighting for any services conducted during power outages. I positioned battery-powered emergency lights throughout the chapel and supplemented them with pillar candles that created appropriate atmosphere while ensuring adequate visibility for safe movement. Margaret Santos's casket was positioned at the front of the chapel, surrounded by flower arrangements and memorial displays that honored her memory. I placed a large pillar candle at the head of the casket, with additional candles throughout the viewing area to provide comprehensive lighting coverage. The viewing proceeded successfully despite the power outage. Family members and friends gathered to pay their respects, sharing memories of Margaret's life and offering support to her immediate family. The candlelit atmosphere created a sense of warmth and intimacy that seemed appropriate for honoring someone whose life had ended in fire. But as the evening progressed, I noticed something unusual about the candle positioned at Margaret's casket. It burned significantly brighter than the other candles, casting more light and creating more pronounced shadows than its size should have produced. The candle's flame was larger, steadier, and more luminous than identical candles positioned elsewhere in the chapel. Not dramatically different, but perceptibly brighter in ways that drew attention from family members and other attendees. "Ms. Rivera, that candle at Margaret's casket seems very bright," observed Father Martinez during a quiet moment. "Almost like it's burning with extra intensity." I examined the candle carefully. Same size and type as others throughout the chapel. Standard pillar candle that should have produced identical illumination. But the flame was indeed brighter, and the wax showed no signs of consumption despite burning for over 2 hours. Other candles in the chapel were gradually decreasing in size as wax was consumed by the burning process. But Margaret's candle remained unchanged. Same height, same diameter, same appearance as when I had first lit it. The viewing concluded at 9:30 p.m. I extinguished all candles except Margaret's, which continued burning with its unusually bright flame. When I attempted to blow it out, the flame flickered but immediately resumed its intense illumination. I tried multiple methods, blowing directly on the flame, using candle snuffers, even covering the candle with a glass container to eliminate oxygen supply. Nothing extinguished the flame, which continued burning with steady brightness regardless of intervention attempts. The candle burned throughout the night. When I returned the following morning to prepare for Margaret's funeral service, the flame was still active, still burning brighter than normal, and the candle showed no reduction in size despite 12 hours of continuous burning. I consulted with Father Martinez about the unusual candle, behavior, and its potential implications for the funeral service. Elizabeth. Perhaps the candle represents Margaret's spirit maintaining presence during her transition, he suggested. Some families find comfort in signs that suggest continued connection with deceased loved ones, but the candle's behavior transcended symbolic interpretation. It was burning without consuming wax, producing light intensity that exceeded its physical capacity, and resisting all attempts to extinguish the flame. Margaret's funeral service proceeded normally, with the bright candle providing additional illumination at the head of her casket. Family members mentioned the candle's unusual brightness, interpreting it as a sign of Margaret's peaceful transition despite the traumatic circumstances of her death. Following the service, I attempted once more to extinguish the candle before storing it with other chapel supplies. But the flame persisted, continuing to burn with the same intensity it had maintained since the previous evening. I contacted our supply vendor, requesting information about candle manufacturing that might explain extended burning duration or unusual flame characteristics. Ms. Rivera, standard pillar candles burn at predictable rates, the representative explained. A candle that size should last 8 to 10 hours maximum. If yours has been burning for over 24 hours without size reduction, there's something unusual happening. I placed the continuously burning candle in our storage room, positioning it safely away from flammable materials while monitoring its ongoing flame activity. Days passed, then weeks, with the candle maintaining constant illumination and showing no signs of wax consumption. The flame never dimmed, never flickered beyond normal candle behavior, never showed signs of eventually burning out. It had become a permanent light source that required no fuel replacement or maintenance intervention. I researched Margaret Santos's background, wondering if her personal history might explain the candle's unusual behavior. Found details about the house fire that had killed her, electrical malfunction that started in her bedroom, spreading rapidly through the older home's wooden structure. But Margaret had survived the initial fire, escaping her house and calling for help. She died later from smoke inhalation while attempting to rescue her cat from the burning building. Her final act had been returning to danger to save another life. The candle's perpetual flame seemed connected to Margaret's final moments, a life force that had refused to be extinguished, continuing to burn with the same determination she had shown when facing the fire that ultimately claimed her life. 6 months later, the candle remains in our storage room, still burning with steady brightness, still showing no signs of wax consumption or eventual burnout. Facility maintenance staff report that the storage room never requires additional lighting due to the constant illumination provided by Margaret's candle. I've shown the phenomenon to colleagues, family members, and technical experts. Everyone confirms that the candle behavior violates normal physics, but no one can explain how or why it continues burning indefinitely. The candle serves as a reminder that some deaths create ongoing presence that transcends normal understanding of life and death boundaries. Margaret Santos's determination to preserve life continues through the eternal flame that refuses to be extinguished, providing light that honors her memory and her final act of courage. Some memorial candles, I learned, burn with intensity that reflects the character of those they commemorate, creating permanent illumination that ensures their memory never dims regardless of time's passage. My name is Carol Henderson, and for 16 years I managed personal effects and inventory documentation at Riverside Memorial Services. The position required meticulous tracking of all belongings that accompanied deceased individuals, jewelry, clothing, personal items, and valuable possessions that would be returned to families or properly secured according to their wishes. Inventory procedures were comprehensive and carefully regulated. Each item required detailed documentation, description, condition, estimated value, and disposition instructions from family members. State regulations mandated precise record-keeping to prevent loss, theft, or confusion regarding personal property belonging to the deceased. Personal effects typically arrived with bodies from hospitals, private residences, or accident scenes. Medical facilities usually provided preliminary inventories, but funeral home documentation required independent verification and detailed cataloging of all items to ensure complete accountability. On August 14, 2021, I received advance paperwork for William Garrett, an 82-year-old man who was scheduled to be transferred from Riverside General Hospital following his anticipated death from terminal cancer. The preliminary documentation included medical information, family contact details, and funeral arrangement preferences. But included with Garrett's paperwork was something unusual, a completed personal effects inventory, filled out in detail, listing specific items that would accompany his body upon transfer to our facility. Personal effects inventory, William Garrett. Gold wedding ring engraved Helen and William 1963. Wristwatch, Timex, brown leather band. Needs repair eyeglasses, bifocals, wireframes. Prescription case wallet, black leather. Contains $47 in driver's license hospital identification bracelet, white plastic dentures, upper and lower plates in plastic container. The inventory was remarkably specific, including details that suggested direct observation of the actual items rather than general descriptions based on family information. But according to hospital records, William Garrett was still alive. Unconscious and unresponsive, but maintaining vital signs sufficient to postpone official death certification and body transfer to funeral facilities. I contacted Riverside General Hospital, inquiring about the premature inventory documentation and requesting clarification about William Garrett's current status. Ms. Henderson, Mr. Garrett is still a patient here, the charge nurse confirmed. He's in critical condition, but death hasn't occurred yet. We haven't prepared any inventory documentation, but I was holding a detailed personal effects list that accurately described items supposedly in Garrett's possession, completed by someone with apparent direct access to his belongings. I examined the inventory form more carefully. Standard format used by our facility, proper case number designation, and professional handwriting that suggested completion by experienced funeral home staff. But no signature indicated who had created the detailed documentation. At 4:30 p.m. on August 14th, Riverside General Hospital contacted our facility to report William Garrett's death and arrange body transfer according to previously established funeral arrangements. When Garrett's body arrived at our facility, I conducted standard personal effects inventory, documenting each item according to our established procedures. The items matched the advance inventory exactly. Gold wedding ring with correct engraving, wristwatch with brown leather band showing wear patterns, bifocal eyeglasses and wire frames, wallet containing precisely $47, hospital bracelet and dentures in plastic, container. Every detail corresponded to the mysterious inventory that had been completed before Garrett's death occurred. But when I compared the advance inventory to my newly completed documentation, I noticed an additional entry at the bottom of the original list, mortician's pen, blue ballpoint, used for inventory completion. The final item described the pen I was currently using to document Garrett's personal effects. But the advance inventory had been completed before his death, before I had any involvement with his case, and before I had used any writing instrument related to his personal effects processing. I checked the pen's description. Blue ballpoint, specific brand, showing wear patterns that matched my preferred writing instrument exactly. The advance inventory had somehow documented not only Garrett's personal possessions, but also the tools I would use to catalog those possessions hours after the original list was created. I researched the origin of the advance inventory, checking our administrative systems for any explanation of how detailed personal effects documentation could be completed before death occurred. No employee admitted creating the advance inventory. No administrative procedures existed for pre-death documentation of personal effects. No logical explanation accounted for the accurate prediction of items that would accompany Garrett's body, but the handwriting on the advance inventory was familiar, neat, professional style that resembled my own documentation practices. Not identical, but similar enough to suggest I might have completed the form during a period of stress or fatigue when my memory wasn't functioning clearly. I compared the advance inventory handwriting to samples of my own documentation. Strong similarities in letter formation, pen pressure, and stylistic elements that suggested common authorship despite my complete lack of memory regarding the advance inventory's creation. Over the following weeks, I began receiving advance inventories for other deceased individuals, all completed in handwriting that resembled mine, all accurate regarding personal effects that would accompany bodies hours or days after the inventories were created. Each advance inventory included the final entry. Mortician's pen, blue ballpoint, used for inventory completion. The phenomenon created a peculiar work situation. I was apparently documenting personal effects before deaths occurred, using handwriting that looked like mine, but completing forms I couldn't remember writing. On September 20th, I decided to test the system by deliberately using a different pen for personal effects documentation. When James Morrison's body arrived, I used a black ballpoint instead of my usual blue ink. But Morrison's advance inventory, which had arrived 2 days before his death, listed the final item as Mortician's pen, black ballpoint, substituted for blue, the advance. Inventory had accurately predicted not only Morrison's personal effects, but also my decision to change writing instruments for documentation purposes. I realized that some aspect of my professional responsibilities was operating beyond normal temporal constraints, creating inventory documentation that transcended the normal sequence of death, body transfer, and effects cataloging. The advance inventories were always accurate, always helpful for family consultations, and always included comprehensive details that improved the efficiency of our personal effects management. But they also suggested that my professional duties extended beyond conscious awareness, encompassing responsibilities that operated according to principles that transcended normal time and sequence expectations. I continued receiving advance inventories throughout my remaining time at Riverside Memorial Services, treating them as useful administrative tools that improved service quality while accepting that some aspects of mortuary work operate according to mysterious but beneficial principles. Some professional responsibilities, I learned, require completion before the circumstances that necessitate them have occurred, ensuring that families receive appropriate care through documentation that transcends normal temporal boundaries, and some inventory management systems understand that the tools used for documentation are as important as the items being cataloged, requiring recognition of both the possessions that define a life and the professional instruments that honor those possessions through careful record keeping.